The Reuters news agency says the UN Security Council is divided on whether to refer the actions of Muammar Gaddafi to the International Criminal Court. The Security Council's discussing a draft resolution that would impose sanctions on the Libyan leader. For more on this, Foreign Minister Kevin Rudd joins us now from Cairo. Mr. Rudd, the US President Barack Obama has already imposed sanctions. What's holding the United Nations back at this stage?
My understanding is, broadly as you've just described, that is that there appears to be agreement within the UN Security Council on the imposition of targeted sanctions against the Libyan regime, possibly agreement also on the imposition of an arms embargo against the Libyan regime, but still disagreement on the question of a reference to the International Criminal Court. That's why the Council is still in session. I should say we in Australia, however, have acted already with the imposition of autonomous sanctions against Libya in terms of both financial restrictions and travel restrictions imposed on key members of the Libyan regime, and furthermore, our own autonomous action in terms of an arms embargo. This follows the autonomous actions by the United States within the last 24 hours.
And what could possibly be preventing any members of the UN Security Council referring Muammar Gaddafi to the International Criminal Court? What would be the argument for that?
Well, my own view as the Foreign Minister of Australia is there are no valid arguments given the atrocities which we have seen already perpetrated on the good people of Libya by an appalling regime, including the strafing of innocent civilians on the ground, deploying units of the Libyan Air Force. Therefore, in terms of what resistance may be occurring within the Security Council, will need to be debriefed afterwards as to why that is the case. I presume it's a concern on the part of some about precedents set in the future for references to the International Criminal Court for other countries in the world. I presume that's it, but I do not know that for a fact.
Okay, and what confidence can we have that sanctions will actually do anything to weaken the resolve of Gaddafi at this stage? If both the United States and Australia and other countries have imposed unilateral sanctions, why would we think that sanctions from the Security Council are going to have any effect whatsoever?
Well, for example, there are a number of countries in the world which do not impose autonomous or unilateral sanctions in the absence of a Security Council resolution. If a Security Council resolution is adopted, then it applies to all countries. Let's, for example, take countries like the United Kingdom, where I imagine the Libyan regime has a whole range of investments given historical engagements in that part of the world on the part of key Libyan political figures. So therefore it becomes a universal arrangement, and that therefore goes directly to the personal interests of key members of this atrocious regime. I think the other reason, though, is this: why a sanctions regime is important. It sends a broader political message to the Libyan political and military elite, which says that the international community is acting with one voice against the atrocities being perpetrated by this regime, and therefore helps to undermine the political backing which Gaddafi has, at least with part of his armed forces.
Okay, Mr. Rudd, some estimates suggest that up to 2,000 Libyan protesters have already been killed. At what point does this become a civil war that could require some sort of humanitarian or peacekeeping role from the United Nations?
Well, we continue to watch this very closely because the level of deaths is now mounting and mounting and mounting. And in the absence of people on the ground extensively across the country, we cannot calculate precisely how many. I've certainly seen the BBC reports which talk of between 1,000 and 2,000 people possibly dead, and I presume, therefore, many more injured. Therefore, what do we need to do? I think a further course of action for the United Nations Security Council and a further resolution would be embracing a no-fly zone so that we have an ability to restrain the Libyan Air Force from perpetrating further mass acts of violence on the civilian population. I think also the arms embargo is a useful measure over time in pulling the plug on international supplies to the Libyan military. But of course, in the immediate humanitarian sense, supporting organisations like the Red Crescent and the Red Cross to get assistance in on the ground to help the Libyan people with food and with other basic supplies. That is what is probably the next and immediate stage of international action.
Okay. Now, turning to Tunisia, overnight we've seen a return to unrest there. We've seen protesters demanding the resignation of the interim government. You're in Egypt at the moment. How stable is the transitional government there, and what are the pitfalls that you can identify as they move towards democratic elections in September?
Just before going into both Tunisia and Egypt, and I'll answer your question in a minute, could I just add one further point on Libya itself? And that is, within the last 12 hours, we have decided as the Australian government to evacuate our own diplomatic and consular personnel from Tripoli. We've done so following the American evacuation of about 24 hours ago. We've done so in concert with both the British and the Canadians. And our Consul General, Tom Yates, and his team have now landed safely in Malta, where I spoke with him only about half an hour ago. We've done this because of the overwhelming security advice about what's happening in Tripoli itself and the very uncertain future which lies there. Can I also say, in terms of remaining Australians in Tripoli, we have already managed to get about 70 or more people out of the country. We still have about 13 Australians there. All but one of those has been contacted. A number have made their own separate arrangements to get out, and a number of dual nationals have also indicated that they themselves wish to stay. And one further piece of consular information is this, that we've had deep concerns about the detention of 2 Australians by the Libyan authorities. One of those individuals has been released, a man who's been in incarceration since December. We still have real concerns, however, about an Australian citizen who was put under arrest only a couple of days ago. So that's just to complete the Libyan update in terms of what's happening on the ground with our people, before turning to your questions about Tunisia and Egypt.
Well, yeah, my question was, Foreign Minister, with more unrest in Tunisia, the demand by protesters there that the interim government be removed, how stable is the Egyptian interim government, and what are you picking up on the ground there at the moment?
I'll be heading to Tunisia in several days' time, so I'll have a better feel for what is actually occurring on the ground there. But I think it's fair to say in both Tunisia and Egypt, there's a great period of political flux which unfolds once you've had something as dramatic as the removal of long-term military leaders, or military and political leaders. Even here in Tahrir Square in the middle of Cairo, and I visited the square today myself, the very sort of heartland of this people's revolution in Egypt. 24 hours ago there was a demonstration here and other parts of the city, apparently, calling for the removal of the interim government of Egypt as well. And there is obviously deep concern on the part of some in the Egyptian political community that the interim government will not be up to the task of bringing about the fundamental political reforms which those who brought about this revolution desire. So we're going to see all this sorts of, I think, flux and fluidity in politics in the critical period ahead. But what I still detect across the body politic here in Egypt is a determination to get on with the business of implementing these reforms. I also had the opportunity to speak to Mohammed al-Baradei about this today in Cairo as well.
Okay, and as they, as Egypt makes this transition, is there a sense that countries like Australia and other Western nations, I mean, how much of a role do we play in, helping to set up institutions like an independent judiciary, a free press?
Well, part of the reason for my being here in Cairo, apart from thanking our embassy personnel for the fantastic job they have done in evacuating hundreds of Australians within the last month, is to speak very openly with the Egyptian authorities and other political leaders, such as al-Baradei and such as Amir Moussa, who are likely to be presidential candidates, on what the international community can do now to help stabilise this country in what's going to be a very fraught political election year. And that means being there as a flexible basis for support for the Egyptians on such things as food security, on such things as helping to deal through the World Bank with large-scale urban youth unemployment, and other areas of assistance as well. For example, an institution building of the type that you described before. That's why I'm meeting with their Prime Minister and their Foreign Minister, as well as their Finance Minister and their International Development Minister in the next 24 hours.